Aloha, namaskar, and hello. I am Anukriti Hittal, and I'm your host on this new show. We are broadcasting live from ThinkTech Hawaii in Honolulu. You can tweet us your comments or questions at ThinkTech so please send them in. In this show, Climate Change Beyond Outrage, we focus on solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the global community. Climate change has been in the news a great deal lately, especially with the COP21 Climate Change Summit in Paris last month. Global land temperatures have risen 1 degree Celsius in the last 50 years, and greenhouse gas emissions have risen 80% since 1970, and they're at their highest in the last 800,000 years. The Paris Agreement has brought 194 nations and the European Union together at the global level. But what does this mean for actions at the national, regional, and subnational levels? Today, we will address this question in our episode Trickle Up, Trickle Down, from the perspective of decision-making for freshwater resources. Our first guest in the studio today is Dr. Victoria Keener. She is the lead PI of the Pacific RISA program and the research fellow at the East-West Center. Her background is in engineering and hydroclimatology. Victoria, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So the RISA program is a NOAA research grant that uses both social and physical sciences to inform policymakers and natural resource managers as to how to prepare for climate change. So let's talk a little bit about your program and the work that you do.
Great. So like you said, the RISA program is actually one of a series of regional NOAA-sponsored research grants. RISA is an acronym that stands for the Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program, which is a long acronym, which is why we just call them RISAs. But there are 10 of them scattered regionally throughout the United States. The Pacific RISA, or our program, covers Hawaii and the US-affiliated Pacific Islands. And we specifically look at how best to translate climate information, take it from the data level, people running computer models, producing scientific articles, and to get that information used for decision-making on the ground right now.
So do you use some of the big global models that have been out there?
We do. There are different ways that different people do it, but our program does something called downscaling. So we take these large global models and we work with a series of different researchers. So as you said, we have social and physical scientists in the RISA program. So we work with climatologists and atmospheric scientists at the IPRC at the University of Hawaii.
And the IPRC is?
That is the International Pacific Research Center.
Okay.
And they do meteorology, atmospheric physics, oceanography. But we take they take the global models and do something called downscaling, which makes them relevant to a smaller scale that's useful for island climate.
And so you said that the Pacific RISA program is just one of the 10 RISA programs. Do RISA programs cover all of the United States?
They don't, actually. The program has been around. NOAA has been funding it since the mid-90s, I believe. And they keep on growing it, but the budget has been stable for a little while. But other RISA programs are in Alaska, the Southeast United States, the urban corridor in the Northeast. There's one in the Central Plains, kind of Texas region, California. But our region is definitely spatially the largest region. So we may have the fewest people of any of the other RISAs, but we have by far the largest area that we cover.
And when you say the fewest people, you mean the population that it's
right.
covering?
Mm-hmm. Right. And it's also interesting, we're one of the only other RISAs that has a semi-international scope, in that we do work with the US-affiliated Pacific Islands as well. So not just Hawaii as a state, but a lot of the other Pacific Islands, and we do work internationally in this region as well.
Very interesting, yes, and we'll talk more about that regional element later in the program. So tell me a little bit about what you do. What does your office do, and how you integrate some of that information.
Sure. So each RISA takes a different kind of tactic in the problems with climate and data that are relevant to the specific region that they work in. The Pacific RISA has chosen to focus on freshwater resource sustainability under changing climate conditions as our focus. So the things that we do within our program, we actually just started the second 5-year grant cycle. So we have some exciting new projects and some exciting new investigators on the team. We do have the physical science component, so we have our climatologists that I mentioned. We also have hydrologists from the university. We also work with the USGS Water Science Center, which is also composed of geologists and hydrologists. We have social scientists, so psychologists, decision-making, risk scientists.
So very interdisciplinary team.
Very interdisciplinary.
That must be fun.
It is fun.
Yes.
Lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
So we really take the approach that to get climate change and climate impacts addressed effectively regionally, you have to be able to look at a problem from both the scientific side and from the social side in order to affect any sort of change. So we need to be able to work with policymakers. We need to be able to communicate to people doing planning on the ground, and people in different scientific fields to really integrate it, since this is a problem that crosses all sorts of sectors and boundaries.
Could we take a step back and could you explain to us why it is that you decided to focus on water, fresh water?
Yeah, so it's both strategic and practical. So strategically, there are other climate groups in Hawaii and the Pacific Islands that focus on ecosystems. For example, the PIXI and the Pacific Islands Climate Science Center. There are groups that focus on coastal infrastructure, Sea Grant, for example. But there really was not a focused group looking at freshwater. So we wanted to fill that niche and provide more information and help people working at that freshwater and climate interface to improve their decision making. Freshwater cuts across so many different types of sectors. So if there's one of the things that the RISA community believes in is being flexible, so being nimble enough to address a societal problem with climate if that's what's happening right now. So if a disaster hits, we might focus some of our resources on a storm or impacts on inland flooding from a storm, so the impacts on storm surge and stormwater routing. It impacts agriculture, it impacts the water supply, impacts ecosystems, and it's very cross-cutting, so it gives us lots of breadth to go where we're needed.
Impacts life on these islands.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. And so you take the information from all of these different experts and pull it together in what sort of format?
So it depends really the community that we're working with, and something that I didn't mention before that's crucial to the way that we do our research is we really are based around the co-production of science and working with decision makers and stakeholders every step of the way.
Co-production of science.
Right.
Yes. What does that mean?
So that basically means that instead of researchers sitting in their labs doing what's basic science work that's important and crucial and has to be done, and just getting into a publication and putting it on a shelf, we work with decision makers to figure out what the relevant problems are to them in their planning now, and we work with them to figure out how we can make research projects where the data is usable for them, where the products are something that both they trust, that they understand how to use them, the information that comes out of them, they understand what the limitations are, and we understand really the context in which they're making decisions. So there's a two-way communication throughout the scientific research problem, which is actually fairly unusual in the physical science research world.
And this is where we have the trickle up and trickle down.
Yeah, exactly. So we're working with people on the ground who are making decisions that impact the community now. We're learning how their timelines, for example. We have climate models that produce their best predictions for global climate and regional climate at the end of the century. but we have politicians who are looking at how to make decisions in the next couple weeks, the next couple of years. You know, it's very rare to find someone who's planning for 2100. So we really like to work with the scientists and the decision makers to come to a place where both sides understand the decisions that each other are making, the factors that go into it, and producing data that can be used.
And so what is your role in all of this?
My role?
Aside from answering emails and phone calls and appearing on Think Tech Hawaii.
Yeah, so I'm the lead PI of the grant. So I coordinate the team, and a lot of my role with my team at the East-West Center is pulling together the research from the different components, the different researchers on our team, and doing integrating it into new research products. So we do work that bridges the social and physical science and puts it into a tool. For example, something we'll talk about later is the work we did on Maui, and some future scenario planning that we did, and we can get into that later to get into more specifics about what we do at the East-West Center. But we do have this large team that needs to be brought together, so it's a comprehensive and integrated
How large
process.
is the team?
I believe we have maybe 8 principal investigators on the grant, and then there are a variety of students and postdocs that work within that grant. We have a large series of collaborators, both on the island and regionally. So we work with a lot of different people, but the core group is probably 7 or 8 researchers.
So that's interesting. You're working with students and postdocs and so on around the region. So are these folks based here in Hawaii, or are they based in other universities in the U.S. affiliated islands?
Yeah, so
elsewhere?
Our collaborators that we work with are more scattered throughout the region, different universities, but the ones most directly associated with the RISA at this point are mostly at University of Hawaii. So we do have a large spread of students throughout the region that we work with, but the most direct ones are here.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. And so when this information is generated, what do you do with it?
When the climate information is generated?
Yes.
So it depends, again, what sector we're working in. So for example, in the water management sector, which is some place that we're active, so working with water utilities and people that own land that has fresh water that runs on it, which, as you might guess, is a lot of people, a lot of different sectors. So we'll work with a water utility, for example, to find out what their planning horizon is, what they're concerned about on the interannual scale, on the decadal scale, what climate information they already use, and what they could use, and if we tailored it correctly, what they would use. So things that we'll produce include rainfall analysis, so looking at precipitation in the future. How will precipitation patterns change on windward and leeward sides of the islands? How will incident of drought change? If we're looking at future development on different parts of the islands, will we have enough water to feed development in a certain area? If agriculture, if we just saw this huge change on central Maui, for example, from the shift from sugarcane into what looks like it's going to be diversified agriculture.
And we'll talk about Maui in just a minute. After we've taken our break, we'll also take a look at how this information is used with some of our on-the-ground communities and ranchers. So that's after the break.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. And you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Aloha, you can join the Hawaii Farmer Series every Thursday from 4 to 5 on Think Tech.
And I'm your co-host Matthew Johnson, here with Justine Espiritu.
And we are so thankful to have this show to use as a forum to get to know all the movers and shakers in agriculture in Hawaii and hear kind of their background and history, as well as
their perspective on what they're doing and also the future for agriculture in Hawaii.
So join us every Thursday. You can tweet in your own comments and suggestions and be a part of the conversation at ThinkTechHigh, and we hope to see you every single Thursday.
Aloha! How you doing? It's me, Angus McTech, asking you to come join us on ThinkTech Hawaii Hibachi Talk. Join me and my two hosts, Gordo the Tech Czar and Ender the Security Guy, every Friday from 12:45 till 13:45. See you on Fridays, and remember, let your wing gang free wherever you be.
Welcome back, and you are watching Climate Change Beyond Outrage with Anukriti Hittel, and I have Victoria Keener with me here today from the Pacific RISA program. We're talking about freshwater resources and decision making at ThinkTech Hawaii in downtown Honolulu. So we were just talking about how some of this information is used on the ground for decision making by communities, and let's go and let's watch a little video on ranching in Hawaii Island and what information they use and how they use this information.
My name is Michelle Galimba, and I'm a rancher in the Ka'u district of Hawaii Island. This is Kuahivi Ranch. It runs from the ocean right up to the Ka'u Forest Reserve at about 2,000 feet. And we are a cattle ranch with about 3,000 head on 10,000 acres of land. We raise cattle to produce beef for the local markets. What I love about ranching is raising cattle and raising them in the open spaces in the pasture. I also really love producing food for people, local people. People have become so interested in local food in the last few years that there's an opportunity to bring the farm closer to the table, and it's just been very rewarding to make that connection again. Conditions have been very, very difficult for this ranch here and all the other ranches in Ka'u. 2010 was really a biblical drought. It was, we didn't have any rain to speak of from January to November. It was extremely difficult to see the pastures getting worse and worse and the land getting worse, and we did move cattle up the mountain. But there's only so much you can do. We did have to call very aggressively last year, and that is one of the ways that you can manage drought. We're still in very difficult circumstances, as you can see. Part of our drought management strategy is building reservoirs up on the mountains. Basically, that is a way for us to hang on to some water from the good times when it's raining and hang on to it so that we have some water to give to the animals during drought periods. The climate information that's most helpful to me is actually the large-scale weather patterns, the projections about El Nino and La Nina, so that we have some idea of what the weather pattern might be in the coming year. Information that's really useful to us is hurricane and storm warnings. We like to know about those, and actually the way that we use those is to give ourselves some hope that we're going to get some rain. Climate matters to me because I'm a rancher and I depend on the rain to produce food for my community.
This is a really interesting illustration of how local communities and decision makers use information such as what's coming out of the Pacific RISA program. So tell us a little bit about some of the items she mentioned in here, such as El Nino, and then perhaps we can move on to some of the other work you're doing on Maui.
Right. So when we made these, we called them docu-moments. And when we made them, what we really wanted to do was link trends in climate variables that we were observing today. So at the end, you saw that fact that said rainfall in Hawaii has declined over the last 30 years, about 15%. So link that to an impact on somebody that is active in the Hawaii community, someone that's involved in local food production, to really look at how these how climate impacts do affect people in the community that are important.
What is actually happening on the ground
Yeah,
to them, and how are they dealing with
exactly.
it?
So Michelle was a great example because she does use climate information to incorporate into the management of her larger ranch operations. And the drought that was the biblical drought, as she referred to it in 2010, was really affecting them and how they managed it. And she put in several adaptation options. So, looking at freshwater for her was important in terms of managing her herd and knowing when to expect drought to plan for how big that herd should be and when and how to manage it. And one of the things that she mentioned was was larger weather patterns being important to her. And one of those things that probably people have been hearing a lot about lately is the El Nino and how that's impacting Hawaii. So we're in the middle of a extremely large El Nino right now. It's a global weather phenomena that is defined by slightly above average temperatures of the equatorial Pacific Ocean, and it causes all sorts of global havoc. One of the things that it causes in Hawaii is drought from about now until maybe May. So we should be seeing Hawaii move into a very dry regime. So some of the impacts that Michelle was seeing might be happening again. So looking at how we can predict these things in advance, how we can incorporate an advanced warning of El Nino that the Weather Service has been doing a great job of getting information out there. The Pacific ENSO Application Center has been letting people know how to prepare for this for months now, but really getting that information out to the community and to decision makers so they can prepare in advance for these things.
So what would someone like Michelle do with that information if she knows there's a drought coming? Would she just have to cull her herd as she did, or would some of the water utilities be working with her, or how would that?
So there are options. She could be looking at reducing the herd size ahead of time. It depends on how much in advance you get that information too, and I'm not a rancher by any means, so I know very few adaptation options. But one of the things that she did mention was building a reservoir in the uplands, so where it's wetter, having a place where she retained water because she knew that she was dealing with drought impacts. So digging more reservoirs for her cattle to use in dry times, things like that. Other things are reducing municipal water use. So if you want to reduce your costs, things that we deal with on non-Hawaii Pacific Islands, because the ENSO drought, or the El Nino drought, which is a part of a larger climate phenomena called the ENSO, the El Nino drought on other Pacific Islands is very severe as well. You can imagine if you don't have these nice tall mountains and reservoirs to hold that water in like a sponge. If you live on an atoll, for example, several months of extended drought conditions can be dire. Your crops die back. Your water supply, which is often catchment based, just outside of your house, is depleted. They have to go to mobile reverse osmosis units. The U.S. military gets involved often.
Well, of course, and now I sort of detracted you from what Pacific RISA actually does, because this wouldn't be something that Pacific RISA would be involved in. Your quote jurisdiction would really be in providing that information ahead of time, so that policymakers and resource managers can plan, and people who are, such as Michelle, who are on the ranch, can actually have time
have that information, know what's coming, know what to expect. And we can offer ways to incorporate it into planning. I mean, we don't have the resources like the U.S. military to go and deliver water to the Marshall Islands, for example.
Right. But the implementation of that
right.
is something different, and that's where Pacific RISA will not get involved in that. That's not your mandate, so to speak. So just bringing you back a little bit to, and it's my fault that I detract you, but
this is stuff that people should know too.
Right. But just bringing you back to some of the work that you've done on Maui as well, and we've talked about that in previous times. What kind of information is being used there? What's being generated? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of our big projects that we're working on right now, we call the Maui Groundwater project. So it's integrated in that it involves future climate projections, so that downscaled climate model that the IPRC at UH has worked on. The USGS has water budget models that are already in use across the islands, so we've been working with them. And understanding and working with a variety of different stakeholders on the ground, decision makers. So we approached the Maui County Water Supply to work with them to see what kinds of climate information they could use in terms of their future planning for freshwater availability. And from there, they helped us branch out to other sectors that would be interested in the same information, so we could build that into our project. We work with a wide variety of the watershed alliances on Maui.
Yes, tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, the watershed alliances, it's actually a great network of people on Maui working to, they do a lot of different things, but one of the things they do is look at restoring native vegetation and protecting native forest, reforesting, controlling invasive species, things like that on Maui. So for different parts of Maui and the watersheds. So what they're interested in knowing, and what our models are going to be able to hopefully tell them, is under future climate change conditions, at a very small grid size on the island of Maui, how will groundwater recharge be impacted? And what my group at the East-West Center has been doing was create a series of future plausible land uses with all these different stakeholders. So the water department, the ranchers, the big agriculture, small agriculture, the watershed alliances, different sustainability groups and different business groups, so all, and the Department of Planning as well. So looking at what are ways that land use could plausibly develop in the future on Maui. We don't want to look at things that probably aren't going to happen, so Haleakala reawakens and it's a big lava field. And we want to look at things like, given the trajectory of development, given the trajectory of agriculture and crop use, let's look at the boundaries of what might be happening in terms of land use, plug that into our model, and then we can get different amounts of groundwater recharge under different climate and land use scenarios in the future.
So how far into the future are you, or how close into the future
Yeah.
are you projecting this?
So of course that's one
for
of
Maui.
That's one of the issues that we have to deal with, is that time scale mismatch, because we do have these global climate models and downscale climate models that look far into the future. And we're dealing with planning agencies that 30 years is their maximum the Maui Island plan, which the long range development did, is for, I believe, 30 years out into the future. One of the things that we can't say, however, and there's a lot of uncertainty in all of the climate projection world, is when exactly these changes are going to happen. So they might happen at the end of the century, or depending on how the socioeconomic development of the world goes, what happened at the COP21 meeting, what happens in terms of global emissions and wealth redistribution, that impacts when these things will happen. So while we can't say exactly when they're going to happen, we can say this is the trajectory that we're heading towards. And to do a better job of incorporating future climate conditions into planning, we should look at these projections and think about our vulnerabilities in the system.
And then is this something that will be expanded out to the other Hawaiian Islands?
We've actually just started a similar project on Oahu, working with the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. And that project will be more water distribution and infrastructure focus. So looking at vulnerabilities of water distribution infrastructure to future climate. So how will sea level rise impact big parts of the border water supply distribution system, things like that.
And so just expanding out even further from Hawaii into the Pacific region, we'll talk about that when we come back from our break.
Great.
Aloha, my name is Kaui Lucas. I am the host of Hawaii is My Mainland, here every Friday on Think Tech Hawaii at 3 p.m. I invite people who are doing interesting and inspiring things in our community to help us keep it local and keep it real. Tune in any Friday, 3 p.m. and also available on our YouTube channel and my blog, kauilucas.com. Hawaii is my mainland. Aloha.
Hello, I'm Stephen Katz, and I'm the host of Shrink Wrap, which comes to you live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, and then it's repeated again whenever you want if you go to the website. On our show, we will be talking to all different kinds of therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, people who talk about the mind, the brain, and about different ways to find happiness. I myself am a marriage and family therapist in practice here in Hawaii, and I hope you will join us because I've got a lot to learn, you've got a lot to learn, and it's a great ride. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Welcome back, and this is Climate Change Beyond Outrage with Anu Hittel, and I have Victoria Keener joining me here today in the studio from Pacific RISA program and the East-West Center, and we are here live at ThinkTech Hawaii. So let's talk a little bit about the regional impacts of your work and the regional scope of the work, going out from the main Hawaiian Islands into the larger Pacific region, and what kind of information is generated from that, what kinds of projects, and so on.
Okay, one of the main things that we've done in the past 5 years contributing to the regional outlook on climate change research and Pacific Islands is our contribution to the National Climate Assessment. So the U.S. released the third National Climate Assessment in May, I believe, of 2014. And we wrote a regional chapter for Hawaii and the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands that was contributed to that national chapter.
So the national assessment, it's a little bit like the IPCC's big assessment reports that they come out with.
Exactly. So the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, produces assessments of climate science and climate impacts for the world, and the National Climate Assessment zooms it down for the U.S. regions and splits it up into regional impacts and looks at the impacts of climate on different sectors. So one of the things that we did for the regional assessment, which we call the PIRCA, the Pacific Islands Regional Climate Assessment, was really look at the ways that climate change in the islands is similar to that in the globe, and ways that it's different, because there are some unique things. And we have a graphic that illustrates some of both the global and the regional impacts. So what this graphic shows, and we created this for the PIRCA, the Regional Climate Assessment, was that there are things that the Pacific Islands share that are changing throughout the world. So for example, carbon dioxide concentrations are rising around the world, and they're also rising in Hawaii in our atmosphere, and people may be aware that on the Big Island we have the longest running atmospheric record of measurement of atmospheric carbon dioxide. Some other things that are similar around the world are we see the incidence, the frequency, and the intensity of extreme events changing, so things like droughts, storms. Globally, we see surface air temperature rising on average around the world. We see changing rainfall patterns, sea surface temperature rising, and things that are specific to the islands, such as at the base of the mountains there, you'll see the habitats and species distributions changing. Some of the, there was actually just a great paper published by one of my colleagues, Lucas Fortini, that made the front page of the Star Advertiser, looking at the impact of climate change on native Hawaiian bird populations. So how is the changing air temperature going to impact where they move on the island? Sea level rising.
I know that they've done some of that work also for plant species and looking at how those might
they have.
change.
There have been groups looking at envelopes of kind of survivability, and I'm not an ecologist, so
That's
I'm
right.
getting the words wrong, I'm sure, but where a plant species can survive now and where it's projected to survive in the future,
right.
given changing rainfall and temperature patterns.
Right, and so if we are wanting to put in refugia for these plant species, then where should those be cited?
Exactly, and that's where some of this information can help. One of the other interesting things in this diagram, maybe the last one that I'll talk about that's specific to Hawaii, is in the lower right-hand corner you can see the base flow in streams has been decreasing. We're lucky in the islands that we actually have a very long record of base flow, which is the groundwater component of stream flow. So from our plantation history, the sugarcane, we actually have great records of stream flow. So we have these 100-year records looking over time at how this base flow has changed in our streams, and it's been decreasing significantly, up to in the 20% over the past century or so. And so that's very disturbing for an island where over 95% of our drinking water is from groundwater. What does that mean for the future? So part of our Maui work looking at the recharge is very important in seeing how that'll impact it in the future. But that was great work done by the USGS Pacific Islands Water Science Center. But yeah, this cartoon of climate impacts really shows the different ways around the region, not just Hawaii, that climate change is impacting a lot of our different ecosystems and climate variables.
And this is something that was produced specifically for that National Climate Assessment and the chapter that you coordinated and wrote.
Right. So one of the great things about the PERCA for the National Climate Assessment was that it brought together over 100 scientists from academia and the private sector, business leaders, people in nonprofits and NGOs, people working in all different parts, the community, all different parts of Hawaii and the Pacific Islands that are being impacted by climate change, and brought together all the best science at the time. So we published it in 2012. Another one's going to be coming soon. But this was up to date at the time, the best assessment and compilation of all of the data and science that had come out for the region at that point. And there's been a ton more since 2012. So we're becoming awash in all this new great science. But this was really a place where it brought together so many people and really tried to present the information in a way that was understandable to a large group.
And then where would this kind of a report, what sort of role would it play in our communities and in our policymakers' lives and so on? Where does it trickle down?
Yeah, one of the, so we actually did an evaluation of how it was used and the type of media attention it got to see how it was helpful. And one of the ways, so first of all, each of the regions in the United States produced a book like this and submitted it to the US government. And ours got over, I think, 300% more media hits, unique media hits, than any of the other regions. And it was, part of it was us pushing it out, really trying to get people to take notice, because Hawaii and the Pacific gets left out when the mainland US is doing a lot of federal policy. And we have all of this great information and are being impacted by climate change. When, we really need to get it out there that this is affecting us now. But one of the great ways that it's being used is as a trusted source of the most current information, even though it's a couple of years back now and we're working on a new one soon. But people know, and when we did these assessments of how it was being used, people trust it because there were so many different people that came together to produce this, that they know that if they were looking on for the most up-to-date information on sea level rise, for instance, that they could go here. They could see what the 20 authors of that chapter that work in this region agreed on. This general term of consensus science that made it into that chapter, look at the references and take those numbers back and use them to help make decisions and plan for, even look at more ways to get funding from the federal government to help adaptation in the future. So
would you say it's more a policymakers document, one that would then trickle down to somehow into the agencies that are using it? Or, I mean, would you see, for example, Michelle, the rancher, using something like this? Or
I don't know if Michelle might. She's an exceptional lady,
Right.
but I don't think it's meant specifically for policymakers or for agency level planners. It's meant for anybody who needs up-to-date information on this general regional level, and then they can dig down into it more. They know who to contact, and one of the other ways that it functions is as it's like a telephone book of who to contact if you're interested in this. So you go to your ecosystems chapter, you say, I'm interested in native Hawaiian birds, you find a paragraph on that. You see who writes all the articles, you email that scientist, look them up on the internet, now you know who to contact about birds.
so it really is sort of a state of the science document.
Yeah.
And then the next one is due out, not to pin you down or anything, but in the general range.
So the last one, so it's the National Climate Assessment is actually mandated by law to come out every 4 years. It has not done that. So I believe that the act was passed in 1996 maybe, and we're only on number 3. But number 3 was by far the largest, and I think the one that tried the most to translate the information into different sectors and different adaptation relevant decisions. So the next one officially should come out in 2018, I guess. So we should be starting to work on that.
And so do you work within the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands when you're working with them? Obviously, this would have been a place where you would have collaborated with many of them.
Right.
Do you go beyond that to any of the other countries in the Pacific as well?
We do. So one of the ways that we want to improve the next PERCA is by increasing the representation of the U.S. affiliated islands. There just wasn't as much information at the time. We were just starting out, and really getting more meaningful representation of them in the chapter is something that I want to do. But we do work with on more specific projects in the RISA as well with other islands. So for example, I'm part of a project on Guam that looks at the impact of climate change on freshwater and the impacts on the Department of Defense infrastructure there.
Thank you so much for helping to protect our freshwater resources, and it's been a pleasure having you in the studios. This is Anu Hittel with Climate Change Beyond Outrage. I will be back Tuesday next week at 1 p.m. Thank you, aloha, and goodbye.